State Senator Dan Stec joins us now. The budget finally passed this week, a $229 billion deal, a record for New York. You and your Republicans said after the budget passed that the spending plan and the spending in New York has gotten way out of control, that under the Democrat supermajority, this budget's about $60 billion more than it was just 4 years ago?
Correct. Over the last 5 years, since New York's been run by just one party, there's been a $60 billion increase, about 26% increase over what it was 5 years ago. It's unsustainable. Everyone's heard me say it's larger than Texas and Florida combined, and that's still true. But I also know that, a Republican starts comparing to New York to Texas and Florida, and some people's eyes glaze over because they don't like comparisons to red states. So here's a blue state comparison for you. California, we spend 1.5 times per capita what California spends. So we are doing something very, very expensive and inefficient here in New York. And we're seeing the results of it. People are leaving the state in droves and record numbers. And unfortunately, I think that this budget is only going to continue that trend, if not accelerate it.
You believe it's become too costly to live and do business in New York?
That's what we're hearing from everybody, from businesses. I think $24 billion worth of income left the state last year, and most of that income went to Florida. So people that can leave, can relocate their business, or don't need to live here anymore, can be retired or earn their living elsewhere, are starting to choose to do that. And unfortunately, the appetite for spending hasn't done anything except accelerate. And $1 billion went to fund illegal immigrants in New York City. Now, people can argue whether or not that's good use of taxpayer funds, or the role of state government, or some might say that since New York City has decided to declare itself a sanctuary city, New York City should take that cost on and not spread the cost over the rest of the state. But if you're talking about $1 billion there, where we couldn't fund school meals for all of our children, that would have only been a couple $100 million. Or everyone likes in the Adirondacks, we always talk about how important that Environmental Protection Fund is, the EPF. The EPF is $400 million. So to put it in context, we're spending $400 million on environmental issues, clean water, those kinds of projects. And then, but we'll turn around and do 2.5 times that for illegal immigrants in New York City. And of course, it's in the news now that Mayor Adams wants to start sending them along to upstate municipalities. Again, I understand some people may want to do that, but I'm not sure that that's what the state of New York, the residents of the state of New York, thought they were signing up to pay for.
And the governor declaring a state of emergency this week, the concern there could be an influx of migrants with Title 42 expiring tomorrow on Thursday. Is there concern that it may not just be New York City, that the busloads of migrants might, as you said, go into other communities? And if so, concerns that those communities and those counties will have to pick up the cost of caring for them and housing them?
They've already started sending them to Rockland County, and of course, officials in Rockland County have already balked at that. That's been in the press the last couple of days. But I do recall over the winter there were news stories about buses carrying migrants to Clinton County, to Plattsburgh. They were trying to then continue on to Canada in this case. So this problem is being spread out, is starting to be spread out statewide. And again, there's a lot of communities that couldn't handle that financially, couldn't handle that with the services that they currently offer. And again, it wasn't something that they signed up to do. The country has every right to control its own borders. And unfortunately, on the southern border, our federal government has decided not to do that recently.
Back to the budget, some of the biggest issues you have with the budget.
Well, again, the biggest issue is what a budget is about. It's supposed to be about a financial plan for the municipality, in this case, the state of New York, 20 million people. And I already talked about, how the spending has accelerated, while at the same time our population is dwindling. And that by itself, I think, is enough to cause concern. $229 billion more than Texas and Florida combined. But aside from that, the other big thing, and the thing that dominated the time, the reason why the budget was late, and of course, dominated most of the news reporting on the budget, wasn't how much the budget was going to cost and how much taxes were going to go up. It was all the policy initiatives that get crammed in the budget. This is my 11th budget, and I'm not new to this party. I've been complaining about this practice that New York State has ever since I got here. It's a terrible way to run a business like the state of New York, where you're using the leverage of $200+ billion to get other policy initiatives through. And unfortunately, the policy initiatives that we're seeing are the electrification. There's no plan. There's no infrastructure plan. Talk to anyone that's done any home projects recently. How long do you have to wait to get an appliance or a piece of furniture delivered to your house? There's a supply chain issue on stuff as simple as home goods. And yet we are going to order a state's worth of electrical infrastructure, and we're going to build this out. And of course, how long does it take to get a contractor to come to your home to do a simple home improvement project? Now, we don't have a lot of labor sitting on the sidelines looking for stuff to do, but somehow we're going to have tens of thousands of workers that are ready to upgrade our electrical power distribution system. And again, for some people, they may need to be reminded, I have a background in energy and energy production when I was in the Navy's nuclear power program. So I used to split atoms, and I know a little bit about what it costs to distribute things, energy around the state. And you're not going to change this overnight. And yet, in 2 short years, the state is going to ban all new gas hookups for any new construction of 7 stories or less, which basically means everything outside of New York City. Again, the timeline is not feasible. It's not responsible. It's certainly not grounded in reality or engineering practices or the current availability of materials and labor. But yet, the advocates and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle just want to ignore all that and press on with their goals to electrify the state and abandon infrastructure. We are abandoning an infrastructure before the next infrastructure is built. That's just not smart. But that was part of the budget. The bail reform was the biggest piece that was debated. And at the end of the day, if you read what was done in the budget, it's window dressing. It's a very modest change. The governor asked for a modest change. She got less than she asked for. And then, of course, the other really painful thing that was done from a policy perspective, and actually was part of the financial plan, was the EF-MAP intercept, or the Medicaid intercept. The federal government years ago started giving the counties directly funding for the Medicaid. And the state of New York has been withholding a lot of that money over the last few years. In this year's budget, they formalized that, and they're going to phase it in the next 3 years. But in 3 years, the state of New York will be withholding from the counties over $770 million a year. And the Citizens Budget Commission, which is a nonpartisan entity, think tank out of Albany, they've estimated that is going to cost county property taxes to increase 7 to 14%. Just that one piece of the budget alone is going to suck up over $700 million a year from our counties. That was coming from the federal government. And I've compared this to, if we were all a family, the federal government is grandma and grandpa, and state government is the parents, and the counties are the children, the grandchildren, and grandma and grandpa are saying, we're going to give the grandchildren some money. And now the parent, the state of New York, is going to take that money out of their kids' pockets. That's exactly what the state of New York has done in this budget. Counties are furious. I know that Mike Zerlo, who's the president of the H.A.L.T Act, the Association of Counties, he is not happy at all, and nor is any county, to my knowledge, in the state of New York happy with that money that's being stolen from them as part of the New York state budget process.
Full funding for education for a 3rd straight year, about $34 billion. Is that good news?
Yeah, education is the most important investment I think that we can make. Certainly when it comes to our kids in the next generation. It's expensive. We do spend a lot of money on it. It is well funded. This was a record increase in that, and I'm a big supporter of public education. Again, a part of that discussion was, the kind of money that you mentioned, over $30 billion. There was a request to have a free lunch for all of our students, regardless of income. And where they landed on it was a compromise where now the school districts that are considered wealthy, the poor kids in those wealthy districts, and imagine there's a lot of kids that are poor from poor families that are in wealthy school districts, they're not eligible for this funding. And the money that we're talking there is peanuts compared to the $1 billion that we're given in New York City for illegal immigration. It's certainly peanuts compared to the $30 billion total in education. So there's an opportunity lost there. But on the whole, we did see a record increase in funding to our schools, and let's just hope that that this will result in improved test scores and performance for all of our kids.
Anything else in the budget that you do like and support?
Well, I mentioned earlier the EPF, the Environmental Protection Fund. This year was increased to $400 million. That typically goes a long ways. I mean, there's a lot of good projects there. That's good bang for the buck, in my opinion. It's money well spent. It's well managed by DEC. Commissioner Sagos has done a great job managing those funds in his tenure, and so I have a lot of confidence in the investment that goes with the EPF. So I think that was one of the more important things that we did there. If it increased funding for CHIPS for our highways. And again, not exciting stuff, but everyone drives on these highways. It's important to education, it's important to our economy, it's important to public safety. I was pleased to see that that CHIPS got an increased funding. As far as some of the policy that was included in the budget, again, I wouldn't argue normally that this should get handled in the budget, but one of the things that did get addressed was some of the issues with the concealed carry law that was passed last year. And as you recall, there was a lot of discussion and back and forth. And as it turns out, at the end of the day, I was correct. And I was so correct that the governor included in her budget and kept to her guns, if you pardon the pun, and fought to get it done in the budget. But clarifying that the Adirondack Park does not mean that you cannot carry a gun on state land in the Adirondack Park. That was a question mark and something that was screwed up last year, as well as reenactors, historic reenactments, historical displays, honor guards. I mean, these are all things that I think most people, even if you don't like guns, most people would say, hey, reenactments should be okay. That's not how that law was written. And, I pointed it out, and a lot of my friends on the other side of the political spectrum were, bemoaning me making that an issue, but apparently I was right, or at least the governor agreed that I was right, and that got done as part of the budget. There's still a lot of issues with that concealed carry law, but the most egregious and ridiculous things I think that everyone would agree on did get cleaned up in the budget. So if there's a bright spot in a policy area, that would have been it.
You mentioned the Environmental Protection Fund, $400 million. $8 million of that will go to addressing overcrowding. That's the millions of visitors coming to the High Peaks region. Is that something that really needs to be taken care of?
Well, I refuse to use the word overcrowding or overuse. We have seen an increase, certainly during COVID. There was an increase in numbers, and those numbers have come back down. Look, it's part of our economy. It's a key part of our North Country economy is tourism, and people want to come to the Adirondacks, and some of those people want to hike. And there's a few of those mountains that do get a lot of use. Cascade is one that comes immediately to mind. Everyone's like, what's the easiest high peak to go do? And everybody knows that Cascade's the shortest one, and it's got a fantastic view. And so you will get tens of thousands of visitors going up there, during the year. So there needs to be some planning done, and certainly some money needs to be spent. But the moniker of, well, this is overuse or overcrowding, I draw the line there. I think it's short of that. But certainly if you're inviting people to the Adirondacks, you got to make sure that the infrastructure is there and ready to receive them. And so this is, I think, a good investment to make sure that we're doing that.
Greg Olson, the acting director of the New York State Office for the Aging, is stopping by here later this week to talk about the master plan for aging that's being developed here in New York State. Also talking about the recently passed budget. Anything from the budget that you were pleased to see that helps older adults here in New York either stay in their homes or provides them with resources or services that they need, health aids, transportation, meals, things like that?
Yeah, well, so the governor proposed about a $291 million Office of the Aging budget. The legislature increased that by almost $20 million to $311 million. So there was I think, a significant increase for Office of the Aging activities. There was a 4% COLA, cost of living allowance increase for Office of the Aging and related nonprofits. That was included in there. It wasn't as high as had been advocated for. I think a lot of us were disappointed that it only came in at 4%. But that was a good investment. Anything that we can do to keep our seniors healthy and in their own homes is great. So you got a lot of direct support needs. You've got caregiver issues. It's cheaper and more effective and frankly more comfortable and humane, if you will, to serve people in their own home rather than trying to transport, especially in the North Country. Transportation is always an issue. You start adding in seniors and winter weather and long distances for medical appointments that perhaps could get done in home, and it becomes expensive and it becomes a challenge. So I think the investments that we're making there are good. $1 million was set aside for a state master plan for aging, where they're trying to coordinate a lot of these efforts.
Has there been a renewed focus on cell service? There was the tragedy down in Washington County a few weeks ago, a 20-year-old young woman, Kalin Gillis, who went down the wrong driveway mistakenly, was shot, died. Her friends had to drive several miles just to be able to get out a cell call for help. Has that renewed some of the commitment and concerns about that there are still gaps in rural parts of New York as far as cell service?
It really has. Now, first and foremost, everyone feels terrible about what happened in Washington County. And it's inexcusable. The shooter, law enforcement should do its job and let the evidence take them where it does, and should prosecute to the full extent of the law. And I'm all for, if you do the crime, you should be punished. So on the one hand, I know I'm not alone. I think most of us want to see that happen and play out. Normally, I would not no one's comfortable. Most of us are not comfortable talking about a tragedy and how a tragedy plays into other policy or problem issues. Because no one wants to look like you're trying to take advantage of somebody else's misfortune. However, the father of the victim in this case has mentioned in his interviews, as has others like local law enforcement in Washington County, that cell service played a role here, and certainly it certainly seems so. On both ends of this tragedy, these are a group of young people in 2 cars and a motorcycle, as I understand it, on a Saturday night, and they were looking for a house party that they were going to in Washington County, and the thing here is, this could have been in Clinton County. This could have been on either side of the blue line. It could have been an Adirondack Park issue. In this case, it was outside the Adirondack Park, but it was in one of our rural counties. I've got 84 towns. This was a town that used to be in my Senate district, and after redistricting, it is one town over. But I certainly know it well, and it's not far at all from where I live. But the idea that their cell phones didn't work to help them navigate to where they're going, so they turned down the wrong driveway. Now, what happened after they turned down the wrong driveway? There's no excuse for it. You don't answer the door with a gun and shooting, especially when the cars are driving away. They realized their mistake. They turned around in the driveway. They never even got out of their cars, is my understanding. And yet the person that lived there shot at the car while it was driving away and killed this 20-year-old woman. So being lost, the cell service issue would contribute to that. But then on the back end of this, after the shooting, they had to drive 6 miles to the town of Salem to get a 911 call out, to get cell service to make an emergency call. That's inexcusable. There are the cell providers are looking to expand and improve their service nationwide. So we are competing with other states and other communities within the state for a finite amount of dollars to try to get investment to improve service. And when I talk to my colleagues from New York City, they're saying there's service issues there. The pipe isn't big enough. And my concern is that, hey, it could easily be that they're going to focus and funnel money into urban areas to improve their service. And we may never catch up. It's a curse of the rural area that we're always chasing this. Senator Schumer was in town a couple of weeks ago. He was in Utica. Now, Utica is not rural. It's along the interstate. Certainly not in the mountains. It's not in the Adirondacks. But yet he was highlighting in Utica a lack of service. So one of the concerns, though, has always been in the Adirondacks that the topography, the APA regulations, which are additional level of regulation, but mostly I think just the ruralness contributes to economies of scale that are lacking, to get this improvement. And so focus that I've had before the shooting, but I think the shooting does highlight that, hey, this could have easily been in the Adirondacks. We need to be looking at every way possible to coordinate efforts between the carriers better, so that maybe there's a balance that can be struck where they're coordinating with each other, and where the state of New York, perhaps because we have our own needs for emergency communications, can be a partner, like we did the broadband project. We had a public-private partnership on broadband that seemed to work. It's a work in progress. It's not done yet, but we are better off on broadband today than we were 10 years ago. I'd like to see that approach looked at for cellular service. I think there's a room to do that. And I think within the Adirondack Park, I think there's some things from a policy perspective that we can do. The cell tower policy for the APA was written in 2002. It was written before the iPhone was invented. I think the iPhone was invented in 2004 or 5. In 2007, I believe it was, that was when that elderly couple went off the road on the interstate, and the older gentleman died. And the wife said she couldn't get a cell call out, and they were in the car for a couple days in a following a snowstorm before they were found, and her husband had passed away. So we've had tragedies happen in the Adirondacks because of a lack of service. So the height and the frequency and the number of towers is always an issue. No one wants to see the park turned into just an array of antennas, but I don't think anyone's asking for that at all. But I think what we do need to do is we need to come up with reasonable changes to the policy to allow fewer taller towers, frankly, to gain more reach, so that if you're driving, I'm not saying that we need to get in the backcountry. A cell service doesn't need to work 5 miles away from a road, but for crying out loud, a cell phone ought to work on the interstate, and it ought to work on state highways and in our hamlets. It's public safety. One of the arguments that I've been forwarding the most, and I've collected some local county data from my districts, is how many of these 911 calls today are coming in on cell service. And the number is significantly higher than it was 10 years ago. And in fact, everyone knows, and the viewers at home will be shaking their head. Many people have cut the cord with their landline to their house. They're only cell phones now. So that is the new reality, and I think that that the policy in the park needs to reflect that reality, if for no other reason, to make sure that the public is safe. So I think there's an opportunity here to say, look, this is not about convenience. It's not even just about economics, although that's a part of this as well. But this is the most basic function of government, is making sure that we have good public safety policies in place. And you can have the best first responders in the world, and we do, and you can have great radio equipment, which we do, and awesome apparatus, which we do. But if you can't initiate that response because your cell phone doesn't connect to anything, then the rest of it's for naught. And so, what I'd like to see when I'm calling on, what I've been talking to people on the second floor down here in Albany, what I've been talking to people at APA about, and I will continue to be talking about, is what can we do to make some reasonable tweaks to policies in the Adirondacks to entice and facilitate better cell service. And certainly, it's not only an issue in the Adirondacks, it's an issue, as we unfortunately found out, everywhere. But the Adirondacks is a big chunk of my district, and it has its own unique level of issues there with the regulation and the APA layer that the rest of the state does not. But as far as a statewide solution, we need to be trying to find a way to coordinate the efforts of the private carriers with the public infrastructure from a public safety perspective. And I think that that would be a good investment, and something that I'm going to try to work on with the governor.
You were out with corrections officers and lawmakers. One Senate bill would increase the penalties for sexual offenses committed against corrections officers, and you're supporting that. You're calling on Democrats to support that.
Yep. So again, under one party rule, we've really watered down a lot of our criminal justice system. Bail reform, which was, again, the thrust of why the budget was a month late, was they couldn't agree on even a modest tweaks to the bail reform. And the HALT, or solitary confinement, as some of the advocates like to call it, it really curtails and has decreased safety inside our correctional facilities, not only for corrections officers and civilian staff, but also for inmates. I've toured a lot of the facilities in my district and around my district the last year, and I've heard from inmates themselves saying that they don't like HALT because it's less safe. There's fewer repercussions for bad behavior, and the statistics show that. Now, I carry the bill that would repeal HALT entirely, and Democrats voted in committee to kill that. It was a strict party line vote. But it takes 32 votes to do anything in the Senate. And there's 21 Republicans that would make these changes in a heartbeat, whether it's repeal HALT in its entirety or the smaller, more local look at the female corrections officers and sexual harassment, sexual assault against them. A few weeks ago, a group of female lawmakers, the Women's Caucus, both parties, both houses, met with female corrections officers and heard their stories. And from the reports that I heard from my colleagues that they learned, it was appalling, the behavior both before and after HALT, and the emboldening of the bad behavior of our inmates against female corrections officers. So they wanted to address that with legislation to increase punishment crimes if inmates assault female corrections officers, sexual assault or sexual harassment. And I'm all for that, but we're going to need Democrats to decide to do that. Republicans can't do it alone. We don't have the numbers. So if I can shame or coax or whatever it's going to take to get 11 Democratic senators to cross over and do the right thing here for our female corrections officers, that would be wonderful. Hopefully Billy Jones can do the same with some of his colleagues in the assembly. But the news reports on this already have been that Democratic leaders are kind of throwing a wet towel on the idea of making changes to H.A.L.T. So I think they'd rather deal with the sexual assault problem that they have in prisons than with the advocates that come to Albany yelling and screaming for these reforms. Sorry to sound a little sarcastic there, but that's literally what we're talking about, is that we've got an unsafe situation in our correctional facilities. There are some very simple answers. All you got to do is listen to the people that work there. There were more than a dozen women correction officers at that press conference, and a reporter asked at the end during the questions and answers about the sexual assault problem, and she cited that, hey, these examples that you said during the press conference, most of them occurred before H.A.L.T went into effect. What about after? Has it gotten better or gotten worse? And the course of women standing on the staircase that work in these facilities all nodded their head and were yelling, it's gotten worse. So I mean, that was about as raw and as honest a response as you're going to get. It wasn't politicians talking. It was, you're hearing directly from these corrections officers what their experiences are in these dangerous workplaces. And it'll be interesting to see if their pleas are ignored or heard.
Any hope that there could be a vote on that still this session?
Well, look, we've got 4 weeks left of session, about, I think, 14 or 15 session days left. When they want to, we can ram anything through. As we've seen, we can run a budget through. We can run a $229 billion budget through with messages of necessity and plow that through in one night. This legislation is very simple compared to a budget. And it could be done. It's just, is there the political will to do it there? Who are we serving? Are we serving the advocates that want to make prisons less safe? Or are we going to worry about our employees, and specifically in this instance, our female employees that are doing difficult jobs? I mean, no one should have to worry about being sexually assaulted in the workplace, especially somebody that works for the state of New York. So I'm very frustrated that we even have to talk about this. It's avoidable. It's a self-inflicted crisis. Again, that the left has done in Albany here with their policies towards criminals.
Dan Stec, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Hey, good to talk to you. Thank you very much.